Hello, hello, everyone. I am Charlie Gilkey. I was going to say this is a monthly momentum call, but it is not a monthly momentum call. This is actually the call for the Momentum Planners bundle, and this is for those of you who bought before the deadline. Let me go ahead and turn my mic down. I know that's pretty loud. Getting that done. Okay, so there we go. Probably better on the sound there. I want to say thanks for joining me today before we dive right in. We have a lot to discuss today, and I'm super excited, not just to talk about the planners, but also to talk about some of the core concepts that are underneath them that will help you use the planners and make the best out of them. So, while we're getting that ready to go and while we're getting the remainder of our people in, I'm going to ask Shannon to go ahead and give some instructions about how to use the GoToWebinar interface for those of you who have never done that before. So Shannon, take it from here.
Thanks, Charlie. Okay, the interface is fairly straightforward. You should see in your control panel a section for questions. If you just click on that, you can enter your question where it says type question here, hit enter, and Charlie will be able to see that. He'll be able to answer it. He'll be able to call on you if he needs clarification on the question. There's also a section for chat that should be down at the bottom of your control panel. And you have the option to send a chat to the entire audience, just to the organizers, or to a specific person who's on the webinar today. So type your message in there, pick your recipient, hit enter, and that's how the chat works. We have also pre-uploaded the quick start guide for the new momentum planners, and so that's in the handout section, and there's also a link to that in the welcome message that you saw when you first logged on. I think that's it, Charlie.
All righty, thank you. So I would like to go ahead and ask if anyone would like to be used as a discussion guinea pig. So as we start talking about some of these concepts, especially when we walk through the webinar, I would really love to hear your actual projects and your actual goals and things like that, because it makes it all that much easier to understand. Otherwise, it's really general and you don't quite get it. So if you'd like to be a person that would like to share their projects and have me work through there, then what I would need you to do is just go ahead and either raise your hand. I see some hands raising. That's fantastic. Um, so there we go. I've got some questions coming in. Fantastic. I've got Yvonne. I've got okay, so we've got some people coming in. Shannon, if you will, do me a favor of pulling them in so I know who I'm talking to. We need about 3 to 5. But at any time during this webinar, you can go ahead and ask questions. Now, we're going to do something really different. Well, for me, not for you all, because you've probably seen this before. What I'm going to be doing is alternating between the actual planners themselves, but also the presentation that I prepared for this. So let's make sure that this is going to work. You know, you try it before you do it, but then when you actually get down to it, sometimes it doesn't want to behave with you. Alrighty, so that's working. And that's working too. So I can't see myself anymore. So Shannon, can everybody see me and the screen?
Yes, we can.
Be really challenging. So what we're going to discuss today is we're going to. I was thinking of the webinar, and I was thinking of today's special. Remember that show on Nickelodeon? And love that show. Anyways, so I'm going to talk a little bit about the background for the changes in the momentum planners. I won't belabor this too long because I know we have some new people who never knew what the old ones were. But for the people that have been sticking around for years, I wanted to make sure to highlight what we changed and why. We're going to go through the core concepts to use with the planners. These are kind of like the operating system for the momentum planners that they're kind of in the background, but they're really important to know about how to use them. And then we're going to walk through each planner, starting with the annual momentum planner. What I'll do is we'll go through sort of the core concepts, and then I'll open up for a few questions, and we'll go back and forth there. But then when we go into each of the individual planners, we'll do one, and then we'll walk through a little bit with people, then we'll do another, and the plan is to go through all of them. So I'm going to be a little bit briefer today on some of the background and core concepts because we actually have a lot of materials on the website, and as we're going along, you'll either see the references and the links are in the presentation itself, or I'll ask the team to share that link in the chat window. Don't worry, after this, when we send out the call notes, I'll make sure to include all of the links, but I just want to make sure that you know cover these briefly. Two, there are more resources there, and three, you'll get them in the follow-up. So that's today's special. Alrighty, so going through. For background, I just wanted to start with just how the planners came about. The planners came about because I wrote a post called "How Heat Mapping Your Day Will Make You More Productive," and I shared an aid, and then people started asking me to do more and more to teach them how to use it and teach them how to plan their days. And so the planner started as a teaching aid. And when it starts as a real-time teaching aid, there are ways in which you can, as the teacher, decide which. Oh, 1 second, I got a GoToWebinar thing going on. I'm gonna. Okay, so let me go back. No. Let me get back on the grind here. Is it still showing? Ooh, I got confused there. 1 second. Okay. Shannon, is it still showing me on the screen now?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
Just you, not the presentation.
Not the presentation. Presentations went somewhere. Okay, so let me get that going again. Oh, go to meeting or webinar. Okay. Alrighty, are we back in business, Shannon?
We're back.
Alrighty, good to go. So when tools start as a teaching aid, you can, as the teacher, swap which one people need. So you're like, oh, you don't need to be focused on time so much right now. You need to be focused on projects. Or, oh, you're focusing on time, you're focusing on project, but we really need to get clear with your day. So the thing about it is when we look at it that way, it's easy to see how one might be able to hot swap and say, you need this one, you don't need this one, switch to this one. That's great when you're teaching it real time. It's not so great when people are buying them and downloading them and don't quite have that person guiding you through them. We've got some other ideas about what we're going to do to make that process better, but that's a surprise, so I'm not going to talk more about it today. So they started that way. And as we started to do the audit of the plan, what we found was that what I knew was that there are actually two types of planners happening. There was actually brainstormers, and then there were planners. The brainstormer, for instance, what used to be the weekly action planner was one that allowed you, or it was a tool that allowed you to get everything down there and figure out what was going on, but it didn't do such a great job at helping you plan and sequence your projects. And then we had planning aids, which were really great at helping you plan, but they weren't great at helping you brainstorm. The problem is we kind of had a meatball Sunday going, where we were having them do too many things at once. So we pulled out the brainstormers and just stuck with the planners. Furthermore, the action versus project dichotomy was really confusing for people because what we found through use was that people would use what used to be called the monthly action planner, and then they would use the weekly project planner, but then they would use the daily action planner, and they were really confused about that. So we just streamlined it all. The last thing, or some more things that we did, is we started incorporating more of the methodology that I've been sharing over the years. So the genesis for the planners actually started in 2007, 2008. Obviously, I've been writing a lot since then, and there were some new ideas and there were some iterations that happened after they had been designed that I wanted to incorporate into the momentum planners. And we went through and did a lot of simplifying, beautifying, and de-busying of the planners. And that was important because, largely speaking, a lot of us are either adult onset ADHD or we're functionally that way because of social media and everything like that. So all of the pretty pictures and buttons and everything that we sometimes see on planners actually distract us from doing the work. So I wanted to de-busy the planners at the same time that I wanted to make them more beautiful. Now, big props to Jo for her work on beautifying the planner. She tried some things And at first, to be honest, like the new headers, I was like, I'm not so sure about that. But then I really warmed up on them. And then Catherine and Joe just went to town on making sure all the fonts were consistent, the lines were consistent. And so, I mean, that's what happens when you have an actual people with actual like graphic design skills designing things as opposed to an information architect guy like me. All right, so that's really the background to this year's changes. Not going to spend much more time there, but wanted to say what happened and why this just isn't another iteration of the planners we've been doing throughout the years. Okay, don't know what just happened there. Shannon, am I still live?
You are.
Okay. Screen's doing all sorts of crazy things for me. Alrighty. So the core concepts that we'll talk about real quick that you gotta know to really get the most out of the planners are as follows. Don't worry, I'll go through each one, but I kind of like giving the landscape. So the pyramid of action perspectives. I know, really sexy name, but we'll cover that in a second. This, I think, is what gets so many people confused when they start doing their momentum planning, is because they're thinking at the wrong level of detail in the wrong time. And when we get this figured out, you can see how to really make them work. So another core concept is using your energy level to schedule your work. This is the old heat mapping concept that I've been talking about. 4 kinds of blocks, using constraints and displacement to make your life easier, the 2-hour rule to chunk your projects down, and the 10-15 split for keeping momentum. You may have read some of these posts, but I'm just assuming nobody knows everything because there's a lot of our work out there. So here we go. So the pyramid of action perspectives. If you've been around on the monthly momentum calls or you've heard me talk about projects, this is a really frustrating thing that in the English language, there's no agreed to word for big project like there is mansion, right? Mansion is a big house, but there's no word for big project that we all agree upon, okay? That gets us into no sense of trouble because when we say things like this is a project, we don't necessarily state how big that project is, okay? So what the monthly or what the pyramid of action perspectives is a way of visualizing and seeing how big projects are. Now, though this looks like a molecule, I want you to think more like a Russian doll scenario, you know, where you have the big doll and then you pull up the big doll and then inside there's a little doll, a smaller doll, and you pull that smaller doll and there's a smaller doll, and so you keep on going, right? So you got in the kernel of that doll, you have the daily task, right, which are these little orange or these little yellow ones, right? A task is just an item you can complete in one go. Pause. You can see this in the handout. So if you haven't had a chance to check out the new Getting Started guide, go ahead and download that in the GoToMeeting panel because you can follow along and you can see a version of this on in that, right? And it also explains monthly objectives and things like that, right? So these little DTs are daily tasks. A task can be completed in one action. The green bubbles, you see they're bigger. Uh-oh, let me go back. Okay, there we go. The green are a little bit bigger, and they contain collections of tasks, right? Projects contain collections of tasks. Monthly objectives, as you see that MO, this bluer one, contains a collection of weekly projects or a collection of projects. Quarterly objectives contain monthly objectives. And then you have this huge goal here that contains multiple quarterly objectives. Now that's all abstract, but it's the way that we actually build things up. What this also allows us to account for is when we have too many goals, you can see like, let's just do the simple scenario. One goal has one goal has a quarterly objective every quarter, right? So you know you're going to be working on that one goal. Well, if you have 5 goals, let me back up a little bit. So every doll has 3 little dolls inside of it. Let's go that way, right? So big goal has 3 different types of objectives that tie into to make it happen, okay? But then when you get down to those quarterly goals, then those quarterly objectives, then you end up with 3 monthly projects, kind of like what we've got going on over here, right? And then you have 3 weekly projects and so on and so forth. If you have more goals, unless they're really, really streamlined and synergistic, you end up with a lot more monthly objectives, right? You end up with a lot more weekly projects, and you end up with a lot more. Whereas if you have 1 or 2 goals, then at any given slice of time, you don't have that many projects and objectives that you're looking at and trying to figure out. So that's the other thing that I want to put on the board, because when we start getting into constraints and displacement, there's only so much time and energy in a day. And you have to divide that time and energy over these different goals and objectives and projects and tasks. The more goals you have, the more you have to divide that energy. And that's where a lot of people get stuck and overwhelmed. Okay? I'm going to have a lot more coming out about the pyramid of action perspective, so you don't necessarily have to take this as the definitive things. It's also going to be included in the book that I'm writing. So there's a lot more material about this, because I think this is one of those key concepts, because really where the magic happens is at the quarterly level. Really, that's where the magic happens. I've learned that as I've taught people this, and as I've taught entrepreneurs and leaders this, when we learn to master the quarterly level of perspective and to think in terms of what we're doing for the quarter, we really start to create some creative momentum. You don't get very far just looking at daily tasks and weekly projects, which I think is one of the reasons why we have so many fantastic tools like Asana, like Basecamp, like Trello, like Todoist, that all focus on the task first, and then maybe they get good about the project. But they don't do so hot when we start looking at monthly objectives and quarterly objectives and so on. And that's where we lose a lot of steam. Okay? So we'll come back to this. This is easier. This is very general. When we start looking at people's actual projects, we can see how that's going to play out very, very quickly. So if you're not quite there, hold the thought. Okay. So a lot of times when we're thinking about projects, we think about energy, or excuse me, we think about time, how much time we have. But really, energy is much more of the limiting factor for our best work, right? And so what I want you to start doing is rather than thinking about time, think about energy, and realize that our energy levels fluctuate throughout the day. There are early birds, night owls, and afternoon emus. Why not? Why emus? I don't know. No one has a name for them. I think emu is a fun name, so there we go. You have your afternoon emus. And the key point is to do creative heavy lifting when you're creative, admin and other stuff when you're not. So this is where when you hear productivity folks always saying, like, don't check email first thing and don't get on social media the first thing. I think what they're trying to suggest is that people tend to be more focused and high energy in the morning, and you're giving that time away for email and admin. And then when you're tired, you're trying to like catch up on the creative work that you didn't do. So there's some resources to help out with this. There's the productivity heat map from the free planners page. Jess, go ahead and grab that and make sure that's in the chat. And also there's the how heat mapping your day makes you more productive article that I wrote way back that kicked this whole thing off, actually, that discusses how to look at your day from an energetic point of view and not just a temporal or time-based point of view. Time blocking. Now, there's a lot out there about time blocking. There's a particular way that I've found to be really effective for creative giants and creative folks and change makers, right? So it's really breaking your day down and understanding there's four types of, that shouldn't be creative blocks. There should be four kinds of blocks, right? There are creative blocks, which are 90 minutes to 2 hours. Again, you'll see this 90-minute to 2-hour thing over and over again because our body has circadian rhythms that refresh every 90 minutes to 2 hours. And so that's a natural constraint for us. The more that we can use natural constraints, the better. There are social/service blocks. Again, to have a really effective meeting to where you're able to prep for it, you're able to be fully present, you're able to capture next items, and you're able to process it in transition. You're really talking about 90 minutes to 2 hours and not just those hour chunks that we give for ourselves. That go back to back and then we get worn out. But that's a conversation for another day. You have admin blocks, which are 30 minutes to 1 hour. I don't know about you, but I can't do 4 hours of email. Just can't. Not going to do it. So I split it down to 30 minutes to 1 hour. This is where things like the Pomodoro technique, if you've never heard of the Pomodoro technique, just grab a link for it. But the Pomodoro technique is you work in 25-minute sprints and then you take 5 minutes off. And you work in 25-minute sprints, 5 minutes off. That's really, really great for admin work, terrible for creative work and deep work. And then there are blocks. The reason self-care blocks have to be put on the schedule is because most of us struggle with creative block, or excuse me, with self-care. It's kind of one of those things we mean to do but never get to. And so it's important that we put it on the block. These are your recharge and rejuvenation blocks. These are the ones that refuel your batteries and keep you in the game. If you don't have enough of that, you're going to be burnout and not have the energy to do what you need to do. Always remember that creative blocks are your limiting factor, LIMFAC if you're a logistician or Charlie, right, for momentum, right? Um, you have fewer creative blocks than you have just about anything else. Most people I found through working with hundreds of people have about 2 creative blocks a day. That's really focused 90-minute to 2-hour blocks. Okay. As you really start tweaking your schedule and redesigning your schedule in your life, you can get 3 to 4, but even peak performing creatives, chess players, musicians, writers, burn out after 6 to 8 hours. They're just done. But you have more time available than that, right? And so you really got to get clear that it's your creative blocks that are the limiting factor for your doing your best work. And there's a rough correlation for most people between the energy levels I just discussed and these blocks, where creative blocks are your highest energy level. The next tier is your social and service blocks. Then the tier under that, your admin blocks. And then when you just got nothing, you can do the self-care stuff, right? So you can kind of see it stacking that way too. That's for most people. If you're an extreme extrovert, you may actually get energized by your social and service blocks. If you're an extreme introvert, it may require like your highest energy to be social. So I want to make sure that it's not a 100% one size fits all. But for most of us who are ambiverts in the middle of the spectrum, it works out this way. Okay. We have 2 more, then we'll open up for questions, feedback, clarifications. Constraints and displacement. Maybe we have 3 more. Anyways, we'll see. Constraints and displacement. 5 is a natural limit when we look at our cognition. You know, the old, what is it? 5 plus or minus 2 items that we can remember. It used to be higher, but they found that with digital distractions, we actually, our cognitive bandwidth is lower than it used to be. And so it creates a really natural limit. So we use it on the momentum planners. That means, one, when we break it down, most people don't get more than 5 major projects done a day, right? When you think about it, you don't get 5 weekly projects done a week when you really scope it up to be the right level and you're thinking at the right level. Most people don't get more than 5 monthly objectives done. Furthermore, there's the memory effect. If you can't remember what you're working on off the top of your head, then that makes it really hard when you're doing your planning to figure out what you're doing, right? If you've got 17 items, no one can remember 17 items. You're not going to get 17 items done. But if you have 3 to 5 or the amount that you could remember, then as you're thinking about things throughout the day, you can come back to that. Constraints set a default so you can make better decisions. I know we creative people love to think in open space, but it's actually the constraints and limits that help us perform at our best. And if you've ever been to that, thing where you've had a whole wide open scenario where you could do anything, and you found it really hard to do actually anything, that's because you didn't have enough constraints. So when we're talking about our own work, we use constraints. When I help people with strategy, individuals and teams with strategy, I start setting strategic anchors that help us make our decisions so that not everything is just up for revision all the damn time. What I found, and this is in life, but it's also in particular our planners, is thinking at the wrong action perspective creates a lot of overwhelm, right? Because what that means is, say you're looking at the weekly planner and you're trying to figure out everything you're going to do on any given day, you're going to be frustrated because you don't have enough space to do all of that on the planner itself, right? Or if you're looking at a quarterly planner and you're trying to figure out what you're going to be doing at a daily planner, you're going to be really frustrated. So as you switch levels, now the momentum planners definitely tell you, like, this is the annual level of perspective. These are the types of things that you're thinking about at this level of perspective. You're not thinking about everything else. If you want to think at a lower level of detail, go to a planner that goes to that level. Okay. Just remember that displacement is just the idea that when you say yes to something, either intentionally or through your actions, you say no to everything else at that time. So at a certain point, excuse me, ooh, at a certain point with the work that I do with clients and anyone who will listen to me over a long point in time, we don't get to say I didn't have time for that, right? Because we all have the same amount of time. We have the same amount of time as Beyonce here, right? What we end up saying is I chose to do something different. And this makes sure that you're not a victim to time, but it also makes sure that you take that you're honoring that there are parts of what you did to that created a scenario. Fundamentally, if you don't have time for the things you want to get to, it means you're choosing to do other things. Okay. And that's fine, right? We're not going to go into values and priorities today on this webinar, maybe another webinar, but just remember when you say yes to something, you say no to everything else. Okay, so now we're starting to get into the sort of we've been looking at this as sort of building blocks and we're building up. The 2-hour rule is one of your best friends when it comes to using the momentum planners or any planning at all, actually. Because the reality is that full days are those unicorns that we keep searching for, but then when we get them, we actually don't know what to do with them. A lot of people I found time and time again squander full days, including myself if I don't watch it, right? Just squander the hell out of a full day. But most of us know what we can do in 2 hours. And whereas we don't really know what we can do in a full day, because again, they're unicorns, we don't get them. Most of us know what we can do in 2 full hours. And see this 2-hour thing again. We also refresh every 2 hours, and that's a good amount of time to get into a project and out of a project and get some real stuff done. So what I want you to do is use 2-hour blocks as the building block for your projects and days, right? And so rather than thinking, oh, that's going to take me 92 minutes, just go ahead and call that a block, right? And you can see that, wait a second, this day I only have 2 blocks, or I'm traveling, so I have no blocks at all. And then you can be more realistic about the time, energy, and attention you actually have available. And last thing, creating and maintaining momentum requires that you monitoring your progress. That should be progress. This is what happens when you rely a lot about projects. You don't even see when you miss it until you present it. So anyways, creating and maintaining momentum requires monitoring your progress. You spend 10 minutes in the morning reviewing your plan that you made the night before. Then you spend 15 minutes in the afternoon making the plan for the next day. 10 minutes in the morning reviewing the plan you made at the end of the day, like yesterday, and then 15 minutes today at the end of the day making the plan for the next day. Here's why this works. In the morning, you're less grounded typically with what your work is, and there's a tendency to recreate the wheel. You've already made these plans. You've already set these intentions. You've already done all that. If you just spend 10 minutes reviewing the plan you made for yourself yesterday, then you could really truncate the amount of time that it takes to do your daily momentum planning. Also, we tend to be much more either realistic or pessimistic at the end of the day. And emotional health aside, that's actually really good for planning, because if you look at your list and you say, man, I didn't do half of what I thought I was going to do. So for tomorrow, I'm going to assume that I'm going to do about the same amount I did today. I know that I said I had 4 blocks today, but I really had 2. So tomorrow I'm just going to plan that I have 2. You'll actually end up making better decisions, and it's always better to have underplanned things and get stuff done and really fueled your creative self-confidence and really fuel that motivation and satisfaction of getting the right stuff done, and then do a little bit more, or maybe not, right? Than it is to overstuff your day and then feel like a jackass at the end of the day and feel like something's wrong with you and you don't know what you're doing and you should go eat worms. Always better to underplan and over accomplish than to overplan and under accomplish. Alrighty, so I'm gonna turn this thing off for a second, and then I am going to figure out, I think, I'm going to jump to the webcam again. I think I'm going to do that. And then open it up for questions. So there we go. Um, what questions do we have, folks? Let me know. We're about on schedule, so that's good.
Charlie, did you see that Yvonne had volunteered to walk through a project?
I did see that. We're not quite walking through projects yet. So we're
Okay.
doing the conceptual stuff first, but Yvonne, I see you. And we're going to use yours to sort of walk through, especially the pyramid of action perspectives. Yvonne gave me great feedback about that, so I want to make sure that it's clear, but also it'll give us a way to work through what that looks like. Okay? So I have a few questions I think that are going to go. I have, Kajal, the project planners are no longer included, and here's why. Um, we basically merged the momentum planners, right? And so what fell out was actually the weekly action planner. So we are currently working on two different things that we're revising, but we want to make sure to go ahead and get what we had out. We're working on on a planner that does a better job of helping you figure out how to chunk your projects down, because we realize that's a huge pain point for people. But again, that's more of a brainstorming tool that will feed the momentum planners. We're also revising the individual project planner as well. Those two might end up merging and there just be one thing, which is a good thing. The other thing we're doing is we're taking the weekly action planner that got bumped out of things, and that's going to become something like a weekly brainstormer. Third thing that we're creating at the same time is a monthly overview of how many creative blocks you have, because I think that's where people are wildly over optimistic about how many creative blocks they actually have. And then when they start looking at how many projects actually take those creative blocks, they end up with not enough to do what they want to do. So those three are in the works. I don't have a specific timeline on them. Joe and Jess and the team are working faster than I think they're going to work, but we'll see. Those three are in the works. So, all right, I have some great questions here. Um, Shannon, the ones that are about, if you can pull some of the ones that are about, um, let me see. I have a couple that are about just the format of the planners. I can answer this one quickly. So, is it better to print and write or to fill things out digitally if I'm doing mostly digital creative work? I can answer that one, Kareem. There's a lot of studies coming out that shows that we actually retain and commit more when we write by hand as opposed to when we write on screens. I think that's also one of the problems that we're having with tools like Asana and the task management tools, is that we just dump a bunch of stuff, but we don't actually psychologically commit to the things we dump in there. And then we do this day in, day out. And so dumping without commitment leads to really, really busy screens that we then declare task bankruptcy on. I'm sure you all have done that too. You just looked at it, you're like, no, I'm not doing it. I'll just start over, right? Start over, clean slate. But then we do the same thing. So it's, I think it's better to print and write things out. I found it to do it. I do the same thing when it comes to mine. So there's that. So I have a quick question from Nicole. This is a great one about time blocks. If you're a night owl, how best should you plan your day? Start in time blocks, etc. So if you're a night owl, it's basically the same thing, except for your creative blocks are going to go in the evening, which means you're going to need to firewall that creative time a little bit more. I didn't talk about this on this, but if you know that you're from, let's say, 8 to 2 o'clock, I know a lot of moms, by the way. I'm not saying, Nicole, that you are a mom, but when I work with moms, creative moms, a lot of them are like, I get the most work done after my kids go to sleep until about 2 o'clock in the morning. But then they kind of shame themselves about that. I'm like, why are you shaming yourself? That's just when you have your peaks. So you would schedule all the other stuff when you're not on fire to be during the day, so you get all that done and then you go. There's an important thing here, right? A lot of times we think first things first means first in sequence. I actually have a post about that. Jess is going to pull it up real quick. First things first doesn't always mean first in sequence. It just means first energy, like for that priority energy goes to your priority things, which may be different than the actual how the day looks. It so happens that, say, if you're Charlie, you're on fire from like 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock or whenever my body decides it's time to get up until about 11 or 12. So first things first can mean first things first for me that way. But if not, you're a night owl. You should go this way. You should go the other way. My man Mike Vardy has done a lot of work on night owl productivity. And so if you go to the productivityist, again, Jess is going to drop that in the chat window. He's done a lot of that because he himself is a night owl. And so that's how you do it. The important thing, though, Nicole, is that you have bumpers that really you have transitions and bumpers throughout your day so that you transition into your peak time and you transition out of it. Transitions are super important. I think enough of us don't pay attention to it.